Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Stellvertretend für die Freunde der Secession freut es mich, Sie zu dem Ausstellungsgespräch zwischen Adam Szymczyk und Vivian Suter heute Abend zu begrüßen. I will continue in English because English is the language which Adam and Vivian speak to each other, and the conversation will thus be also in English. It's very, very special for us that this constellation of a conversation between these two specific people can take place here. I thank you, Adam. I know that you had to go. It was complicated for you, but nothing is as far as Guatemala, and so I think it's fine. Adam and Vivian have a very long-standing and grown relationship. This is not a pairing of a curator and an artist, which is haphazard. It's actually a very grown relationship they have cultivated and developed. When Adam was director of the Kunsthalle Basel, I think it was from 2003 to 2014, he came across the format of showing Basel artists. I think the Kunsthalle Basel requests to do this from their curator every 2 years. Is that correct, Adam? You will speak about it. And he came across this exhibition from 1981, which was put together by Jean-Christophe Amann. It was 6 artists, Miriam Kahn,
Hanna Williger,
Ruth Himmelsbach, and also Vera Suter. And he started to be interested in her position and researching. Adam is a passionate detective, really, in his private life. And he researched her whereabouts and found out that Vivian lives in South America, in Guatemala. He contacted her and invited her to participate in this exhibition in 2011, and she traveled to Basel, and then later on in 2014 had a solo exhibition in the Kunsthalle Basel, and then came the moment in 2017, which was Documenta, where we, the Friends of the Secession, and the board, many of the board of the Secession, were encountering Vivian's work for the first time in Athens and in Kassel. And I still have, it's a memory, a visual memory, which everybody who you speak to about Documenta has or brings up, which are Vivian's paintings on top of an Acropolis hill weaving in the wind. So much for their relationship. After this Documenta participation, the exhibitions of Vivian became very, very tight space. There was Reina Sofia, the power plant in Toronto. There was Luzern, I think. There was Liverpool, the Tate Liverpool, and there's ultimately us also. And seeing this show now and having had the privilege to watch Vivian install it for the past 8 days, this is actually really a moving moment where you see this labor of love opening to a wider public. Vivian's presence here at the Secession is not only special because it's such a fabulous artistic position, but also because of her biographical datas. And this I found out working with her. Vivian is Viennese, you could say, almost, partially Viennese. I don't want to claim you entirely. Her family was from Vienna. Her grandmother, Bertha Suter, had a salon on Prinz-Eugen-Straße. Her grandparents, Franz, and what was her name? Your grandmother? Steffi Pollack, lived and were part of the you could call it jüdisches Mäzenatentum of the turn of the century in Austria. They were forced to emigrate. They were forced to leave Vienna in 1938 and fled to Argentina with their daughter, Elisabeth. And there, some years afterwards, Vivian was born. Again, they had to change their home from Buenos Aires. The Polacks moved back to Vienna, whereas Vivian and her mother moved to Switzerland, where Vivian went then to the art academy in Basel and started a very quite successful artistic career, which she left behind in the year 1983. She had enough from the Eurocentristic art world and went and settled in Panajachel in Guatemala, where she still lives until today. This is a very special moment for Vienna because we have Vivian's work here at the Secession. We also have the contribution of her son in this exhibition, who's a musician. So Frank Wild is part of the show with his music, which you can access through a QR code within the show. It is a song composed by Vivian, and in a week's time there will be an opening of Vivian's mother's work at the MUMOC in Vienna on the 5th of May, I think it is opening, the 4th of May, sorry. So it's really 3 generations of artists which you can see at the same time. It's an unusual moment, and I invite you all to attend and to look at the exhibitions. And now I would like to thank you again for doing this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie, and thank you for the invitation. A big challenge. We've never spoken in public.
No.
Our conversation has remained quite private so far, although we've known each other for a while. So I think the reason why we agreed is that it's in Vienna and it's at the Secession, so there was no other choice than to do it. We were far too tempted, let's say, to speak in this grandiose room, which, however, got substantially transformed by Vivian's show, I think, more than just installing paintings in a space. One could say this show responds to the original premise on which the building of Secession was designed by its co-founders, and famously becoming somehow a prototype of the type of gallery that later became known as a white cube. Of course, Secession is a rather complex cube, but nevertheless, the walls of Secession invited art as a sort of neutral, relatively neutral, fairly abstract background, and not the type of neoclassical or historicist decor that the galleries of that time were full of. So, in a way, it's a perfect exhibition space, I always thought. I never had a chance to work here, but I thought, you know, it's kind of near to what one could say is a perfect space with this wonderful skylight, a lot of daylight coming from the top. Great for showing paintings, but here we have a sort of tour de force installation which takes over, and one could say that the space sort of disappears. It becomes quite mysterious, as if we didn't really know it too well. You have to enter and find your way between paintings, and with all the differences of scale, this show reminded me most of a fantastic exhibition that Vivian did at the Parque de Retiro in Madrid when she had an exhibition with Reina Sofia. It was also very dense. Here, when I said dense, you said it's not so dense. Well, it's maybe not so dense because you are the density of the show, namely the audience, and when you are finally freed from your seats you will sort of spread around the room, and then it's getting really very interesting because you'll find ways of having private conversations in corners of choice, behind paintings, not seeing the others, and in such a way that is a little bit similar to wearing a mask, in a carnival or some sort of public situations where your identity should remain maybe not too open. So this much about the show. We also received the wonderful book. It's really a great book, and I heard it's only 800 copies left, which makes me feel like I need at least 10, because each of them has a unique leaf inside, and those leaves have been put inside with patient hands of bookbinder who made this book. And I love handmade books, and I think Vivian loves to work with people who can do things with their hands and their mind too, of course. And I feel that in comparison to other books of Vivian that are also great in their ways, this one is very particular because she sort of, to my great surprise, put a lot of personal material in it, which somehow makes our conversation a little redundant once you have a book in your hands, because you'll understand everything through the language of pictures, which is far easier than just using words. These pictures in the book are both of works and works in situ, meaning in the garden, in the house, and in the studio of Vivian in Panahachel and in the surroundings. There are also many pictures of little, I would say, exhibitions or displays that Vivian is constantly arranging and rearranging at her home, that include both artworks that belong to her family, memorabilia, found objects, objects produced by craftsmen in Guatemala and Central America, and so on and so forth. So we will go back to this book in the conversation, and I hope, Vivian, that you are happy to finally show your work in Vienna, which is the city that you have known, I suppose, first from the stories of your mother. So I wanted to ask you for a start to say something about, how you got to know this city.
Well, first I want to say that I'm very honored to be here and moved, and just thank you. And as my mother came from here, and my grandparents, and I always came to visit them, I got a very strong connection with the city, because my grandfather always brought me to the museum, to the Secession, and taught me about the history, and also in the Wienerwald, the ruins, and I have a really strong connection to Vienna. So that's why it's so special to me, and that's why I thought in this book it should be personal.
Yeah, but I suppose the memory of the city and the memory of your family also involved a very dramatic moment of leaving the city, or of having to leave the city. Yes. So I wanted to a little bit go back to the moment before you visited Vienna, and to understand a little bit how Vienna functioned in the memory of your family as a kind of imaginary locus that your family left in 1938.
Yes. Well, my grandmother was a great storyteller, and told me all the things that happened in the house and with other people, stories of her life and how they lived here, but actually not of the dramatic way they had to leave, just the path, how they went from here to Zagreb and then to Venice, where my grandfather said we have to see Venice before we leave this continent, yes, to my mother, because she was only 15 then.
And then they continued from Venice.
Yes, they continued through Switzerland, Italy, Switzerland, and then took a boat in Rotterdam, Belgium, and all the people were very nice with them, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it was almost like, I always thought it was like Grand Tour in reverse.
No.
A little bit, and under very different circumstances,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But still quite ground.
Yes.
Which eventually brought your family to Rotterdam, right?
Yes.
From where they took a
cargo boat.
Cargo boat.
Cargo boat, yes.
Yeah. And they arrived in Buenos Aires.
Yes.
Where you were born some 10 years later.
Right. And the other part of the family went to Australia.
Yeah. Your father was Swiss. Which language did you speak at home?
High German.
Mm-hmm. And did you speak... Good. So neither of the two. Right. And Spanish? Was Spanish already around? Like, when did you learn Spanish?
Well, with the kids at school. Yeah.
So you went to schools in Argentina?
Yes.
Okay. So your Spanish is from that time?
From that time,
okay.
Yes.
It's not from Guatemala, but already...
Yes, yes.
So you kept it throughout? Okay.
Yes, that's why I liked Guatemala also.
All right. And so in the 1960s, your family left Argentina, which, I mean, I never heard it from you or from anyone from your surrounding or from Elizabeth, but I understand that the year in which they left was the year, it was around the time when Eichmann was captured in Argentina.
Yeah, Buenos Aires.
And it was also the period in which a sort of extreme right movement was sort of growing and very active in Argentina. And I always imagine that, there was one of these twists and paradoxes which are painfully real, that, arriving to a country where you make life, you encounter a very strange similarity to the situation that probably you wanted to have nothing to do with. So they left for Switzerland, where your father was coming from, and settled in Basel.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit like how your mother worked in Basel? Like how did she?
Yeah, well, it was a very, very difficult transition for her, like for me, because Swiss people don't let you in easily. So we had. So my mother felt, as my father was quite older also, that my mother, the family of my father was old, so she didn't get so much contact. And so she decided to open an antique shop where she restored paintings and painted copper Bauernmöbel. Yes, she took old motifs and painted them and repainted old paintings so that she liked them and could sell them better, and made restored porcelain and all sort of things.
So she was very gifted, but she was also trained as an artist,
yes,
right? Could you say, because I'm interested in this because this is part of your formation as a very young person. So art was always around, also in the way that your mother studied art.
Yes.
And then she also practiced it both in in the realm of applied arts.
Yes.
Right? Could you speak about that, like how she came to art, making art?
well, that was in Argentina already, right? She went to Bellas Artes, and there she learned painting also, had private lessons with a very known painter, and then she started making textiles and had her own studio, and that's how she met my father. That had a cloth printing factory.
So it was a textile printing factory.
Yes, yeah. And she went with her mappe and showed it to him and so. But before, actually, she had to work. Before she could do that, because she had to help support her family. She was like a nanny for really rich people, and and painted the children's rooms and had to speak French with them, but was not treated really nice, too nice, everywhere, yes. And until she started her own career, yes.
So in Argentina, she designed textiles, patterns for textiles.
Yes.
Yeah. And then coming to Basel, that didn't exist anymore. No more involvement with textiles.
But she always painted, oil paintings, and already then started collage and made ceramics.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the moment or the time when you decided to enroll in the Kunstgewerbeschule in Basel? You?
Yes, I remember. My father was against it totally, so I had to start something else that didn't work out, and then my mother supported me, so I could enter to the school.
And it was Kunstgewerbeschule, so
yes.
a kind of idea of like relationship between liberated arts and crafts was still there. But your teacher was a rather important painter.
Yes.
Right? So you started painting, basically.
Yes. Well, first you have others, you study different things, and then I specialized in his class. Mm-hmm. And he took me.
And he was?
Franz Fedier.
Yeah, Franz Fedier, who also, among other things, had participated in a documenta before, so he was not exactly an unknown figure.
Yeah.
Could you say something about the class, the way you studied back then?
Yeah, it was really very free also. He took us to the documenta, we painted on the snow.
To documenta in 68?
Yeah, the orange big catalog, I don't know.
72? Mm-hmm. Well, that's an entirely different deal.
Why?
Well, that is a very interesting piece of information.
Why?
Well, because I didn't know. I mean, like I wish I could see this documenta, of course. But I didn't know that you went there, and I can sort of connect a few pieces then, because my next question was how, coming from a class of a painter, and I saw some of his work because I was curious, so I wanted to see like what type of work he made, and he made like different kinds of work. So he was changing a little bit. Like some paintings were more like going towards pop art in the late 60s, but no orthodoxy, like with his own personal, let's say, bent. And then I was wondering, how in Basel in the early 70s you then come up with works that I have to, call like conceptual, and that basically had a lot to do with photography, we can talk about it in more detail because we won't see these works here, and they are also not very often discussed. But there are works that are photo-based, and there are works that are involving drawing of certain objects, and there are works in situ as well. The one in Italy, for instance, that has to do with kind of fence that you made drawings of particular elements of that fence, and then the drawings are shown in relation to photographs of elements of the fence, which is built by an anonymous person. So was that documenta in 1972 a kind of major thing, like opening eyes, or do you remember?
Oh, for sure, yes, it was an incredible experience for me.
It must have changed quite a lot for people who went to this trip, I suppose.
Probably, yes.
In Basel.
Yes.
And in which year did you graduate, more or less, in Basel?
Well, you know, with I don't remember.
Me neither.
I can tell you. Probably I was. Over 20.
74.
Yes.
73 maybe.
Yes.
So okay. Okay, so then you are out of the art school at some point, or Kunstgewerbeschule.
Yes.
So what do you do? Like, do you want to be an artist and show your work? Where do you go? How do you?
Or I already showed work during the time I was studying.
All right.
With the Gallery Stampa.
So you had gallery shows while still a student.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Stampa started their. Well, first they started a kind of bookshop and sort of information office space in the reception area, Diego and Gili Stampa, of Kunsthalle Basel during a very interesting period at the Kunsthalle Basel between '69 and '71, when they had a rather visionary director called Peter F. Althaus, who invited a lot of kind of process-based or oriented or process-involved art into Kunsthalle, and he also insisted on changing the function of Kunsthalle as something that could respond more to the society of that time. And a part of that was that information had to be exchanged. And Stampa started as basically running a space in the lobby with a sort of bookshop, and then moved to then opened the gallery without much noise, let's say. So you have been showing with them for quite a long time, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so you had shows regularly with Stampa through the 70s.
Yes. But just with them, it didn't continue much.
Yeah, okay.
You know, the Kunsthalle then was.
Yeah, and apart those gallery shows in Basel, you also traveled.
No, I did. Yes, I was in Italy. I had shows in Italy, and.
Sure. So
yes,
you got some.
Yeah.
Some shows around, and at a certain point you also went for rather long journeys, right?
Yes.
And how come? Well,
I always wanted to do that.
And the journeys were?
They were extended journeys with the Land Rover, and my then husband. I married very early, also to be able to go away and make all these things out. Yes. And
so where did you drive? Where did you travel?
Through Africa, all through Africa till to Tanzania, not further because there was the apartheid and we didn't want to confront that. So then we went to Tanzania and crossed to India, Afghan, yes.
And then you drove back?
And then to Ceylon, through India, Ceylon, and then Moscow, and back.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's very modest. Yes. So yeah, there was another kind of journey, and then it seemed you sort of after this. So it was one journey basically, or
Yes.
okay, but kind of extending over
Yes.
3 continents and
Yes.
so forth. And after this journey, your career as an artist consolidated or got consolidated through exhibitions and inclusion in the famous show of 1981, which is now famous, and back then it was just an experiment, because in 1981 Jean-Christophe Amann decided to kind of provoke the audience in Basel by giving those 6 artists, including Vivian, who are young and really eager to show the work, an exhibition in a sort of prime time, because normally they would be relegated to the Ausstellung, so every year they would, the local artists would show the work. But Amann made a move, and he showed not only those 6 artists who are doing painting, sculpture, photography, and so forth, but he also, there were actually 6 more artists who were doing more like performance and also music bands. So it was quite a rich exhibition, which produced some lasting effects, and there were very vivid memories of it still I could sense in Basel many years later, and that was the moment when I thought it would be interesting to revisit the show, because I was kind of bored with the idea of inventing narrations of group exhibitions, So I thought like there were so many interesting group exhibitions and exhibitions in general that I felt like I should do it again, like doing it again became like a bit of a obsession or task, and there was the moment when I made a call to Vivian and heard her voice for the first time, which I remember. She was in Guatemala, and I've never been to Guatemala. It sounded completely abstract, and I imagined all kinds of things. I imagined a person who would tell me like, "Who are you? What?" and would just say like, "Yeah, get lost." But you said yes. So then you brought the paintings, and you had some paintings in Basel, in a small storage space, and that's more or less the moment when you entered these rooms of Kunsthalle again after 30 years, and for me it was absolutely fascinating to see 5 of those 6 artists, because one, Hanna Williger, had died already back then, install their work in the rooms and kind of struggle with their own history and trying to negotiate like clever ways of how to address this repetition. So, for instance, some decided to show exactly the same work, like in 1981, but that was not really possible. And some others decided to show only new work, and so forth. And with Vivian, we had quite a number of paintings, and then we moved after a few years to an exhibition in which also you invited your mother to have a room in the very center of the show that expanded over the entire ground floor of Kunsthalle. So suddenly I realized that there is like another artist, so you kind of have to consider. And our working together was always in... Yesterday I had a conversation with someone about the idea of like triangulation, or like sort of triangular type of relation in which basically no matter what you try to do to unsettle this triangle, the triangle always sort of recomposes itself. So it's not a kind of fixed structure, but it's a triangle, but it's a triangle that changes shapes. So at various moments in our, let's say, professional and personal acquaintance, both your mother and you came to the fore, so to say, and had an influence or had a say. So partly it was, in the beginning I thought it's going to develop according to the scenario in which you will most likely have exhibitions and then your mother will be invited in those exhibitions, but very quickly it happened that people actually started to be interested equally in her work during, I think, last a bit over 10 years of her life. And in parallel to that, of course, interest has grown in your work. And I think the decisive moment in terms of a kind of international recognition or like kind of awareness of your work was Sao Paulo somehow. I think that when you showed the work in the Sao Paulo Biennial in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, after that came some other invitations which led also to this exhibition at the Secession. And this is a special exhibition because it, for the first time, to my knowledge, involves this sonic component, as one could call it, or in other words, the work of your son, Frank Wild, and who is also here somewhere. Frank?
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Over there is Frank Wild. Hi, Frank. Exactly. Could you describe how come you collaborated this time with Frank? What is it all about?
Well, it was actually more Ramesh's idea, I have to say, because she thought it so nice, you know, to have my mother, the other museum, and here, and that here young artists have an opportunity, and that's how it came. And it was not very easy to convince Frank, but finally he said yes. Mm-hmm. He came to an idea, yes, how.
Yeah, I met Frank for the first time in 2012 in Mexico City, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when both Vivian and Elizabeth were part of the show at Museo Tamayo. And we met then I realized, I think you gave me some CDs back then, which I still have, that you made.
Yeah.
And you were then more like a music producer, and you made records, right? And so over 10 years that followed, the situation developed to such a degree that a sound studio was created or built in the estate where your studio, where you paint, and the house and so forth are. And so the music became like really part, like the sound or sound recording, experimentation with sound became very much part of the place. And it's still going on, right?
Yes, it is.
In a sense of like it's developing.
Yes, I can say so.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we had a show in which we have like, it's full of personal traits, but I'm usually very skeptical or kind of instinctively distrustful towards sort of personal traits in the work, and we all like things that are neatly objective. But I think in Vivian's work, this biography, or rather biographies, are really central. And it's not about understanding how emotionally important is Frank for Vivian, because what can we know about it? But we can understand certain stories and certain trajectories as they overlap and produce quite interesting results. And that is the story of both your family here in Vienna, and then your family in Argentina, then your family in Basel, and your family in Guatemala, and other places where your family is. And all of that is somehow feeding in this work, believe it or not, because the question which I had when I first saw Vivian's work, that I didn't know back then in 2011, except for few reproductions and maybe few small catalogs of the work that was sort of 30 years or 20 years older, I thought, okay, this work is kind of abstract. And then it also seems to include a lot of motifs from observation of nature and perhaps some kind of interest in very simple architectural structures, like architecture not made by architects, but made by people for a purpose. It can be a fence, it can be a shack, it can be a wall, and so forth. I thought the work was not really telling me any particular stories. It was kind of like, it was hiding its narration inside of it. So it was not like that kind of abstract work where you have the feeling that there is this kind of world that is geometric or that has to do with one particular type of gesture and makes abstraction non-geometric and so forth. But here there was something strange in between that I thought was really not allowing me to articulate something that would make sense vis-a-vis the work first time I saw it. Because what could I do? I could call some references, but references, well, they fail us after a while, So the fact that one or the other painting that Vivian made around 1984 or 82 made me think of American artists such as Elizabeth Murray means precisely nothing, because perhaps Vivian saw back then, one or the other work or work of 15 or 55 other artists, and then that got sort of merged into something from which she made her own work. So the work was wildly original to me, and I had a fear of that because I knew all the political doubts about this kind of originality of the work. I thought, like, no, I mean, this cannot be. Like, how can there be someone who is just making these paintings and is not idolizing the idea of a painter at work? So it was like going super much against a certain male phenomenon of painting of both the early 80s that eventually, for instance, brought someone like Miriam Khan to withdrawal from Documenta because she was put in the room where the place where she was supposed to show her work was suddenly given to another male painter, and then she took her work and left. So there was this kind of confrontation going on. I think also in terms of abstraction, that was a very problematic ground, and I think it's super courageous, but also like completely focused, precise, and autonomous, the way you develop this way of making and way of sort of integrating or like bringing the surroundings into the work. And I don't want to mythologize nature, like nature is not something that is beautiful and chirping birds, but it's occasionally also violence, exploitation, and other phenomena that have to do, with less picturesque aspects of nature that cannot be reduced to mere, landscape and abstraction of landscape. So I think that your work is growing very much from like being there, and not so much, from a kind of distantiated contemplation of a landscape. However, this landscape is very powerful. Vivian lives very nearby to a rather huge lake. Around the lake there are at least 3, I think, big volcanoes.
Yes.
And also a much smaller mountain called
Cerro de Oro.
Cerro de Oro. And Cerro de Oro is a little mountain which, which gave a inspiration, let's say, to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who crashed in Guatemala once. His plane crashed, and he was sort of recovering from his injuries in Guatemala, and he was a lot around the lake Atitlan. He saw the Cerro de Oro, and he then transformed it into, I think, one of the first drawings of the Little Prince, which is the drawing of the snake eating an elephant, which you first see as a section of a snake with elephant inside, and then the elephant disappears, and you see something that looks like a hut, and you think about, the fact that Saint-Exupéry speaks about that this is actually a snake eating an elephant, but it's a little bit like Magritte saying that this is not a pipe. So that drawing took its shape from that little mountain on the lake of Atitlan. So first of all, it's like wonderful nature, but it's also culturally extremely dense, saturated area. Also having in mind that a Guatemalan government was, I think, one of the very few countries early on supporting the state of Israel after the war, and therefore there is a very strong presence of, for instance, Israeli tourists around the lake. So you enter these villages, which are normally full of backpackers and indigenous people from the many peoples that are original people of Guatemala. And then you have the Israeli organized trips. You have all kinds of people, and they all left their traces around that lake. So I wanted to ask you, especially through the fact that your mother was trained as a textile designer, my feeling is that you have a very strong connection to the traditional weaving and patterns in Guatemala, and both your mother and you were collecting, if one could say, or just you had a lot of those wonderful fabrics.
Yes.
Could you say something about how you discovered them, and where do you go to get them, and how you work with that?
Well, at the market, yeah, I like to go to the market to get them, because there you meet the women that weave them, and actually they all wear these clothes still, and this is very unique in South America, and they may be also in Peru, but already in Mexico you do hardly see it, Salvador and so. But what is your specific question?
My question is how this work, how the woven work of the indigenous people of Guatemala is, if at all, somehow transpiring into your work, because you used these shawls or scarves once at least in an exhibition in Fleshau.
Yes. Yes, with the sculptures.
Mm-hmm. So it was an exhibition in which there were paintings?
Yes, and then I had these weavings also, and that fit very well with it. I mean, it's like a piece bringing from Guatemala, like my paintings. It is very near to it.
Yes.
What?
No, because you said that you draped those scarves or shawls on sculptures.
Yes.
On Gothic sculptures.
Yes.
European Gothic sculptures. Fleshau is former meat market, a medieval structure that remained from the Second World War. The rest was destroyed, largely rebuilt, but still quite intact. And there are some sculptures in sort of niches or arches. And it was quite amazing to see how they came to life when you put those Guatemalan scarves from around the Lake Atitlan on the sculptures. because I thought it was exactly what you showed us when we visited with the students of the seminar that I had here at the Academy of Fine Arts called Principle of Equality. You took us to one of the churches on the other side of the lake, right?
Yes.
Which is San Pedro la Laguna.
Yes, Santiago.
Santiago la Laguna. And in this church, there are sculptures that are they look like kind of local variation of late Baroque, maybe, but they're kind of timeless, of saints. But all those sculptures are dressed. They are dressed in this amazing clothes. Colors change, so I think they are dressed and redressed and so forth.
Yes.
So I thought your gesture of, bringing those fabrics to Fleshaus very much similar to how those saints were celebrated over there in Guatemala. So that was for me like one of.
That was very nice. That's true. It made it very special.
I wanted to ask you a question about titles. Titles both of exhibitions and maybe titles of works. So let's begin with titles of shows. And the show at Kunstmuseum Olten had a Spanish title, right?
Alrededor de mi cuarto.
If you say so, what does it mean in English?
Around of my room, but cuarto is actually a square, so it's around my square. Yeah.
So, this is maybe the first of those titles that I think together they build a certain text. If you put them one below the other, which I think hasn't been done to date, but we will, they are going to make a space, and this space is not only going to be about purely spatial characteristics, but also involving persons in spaces, right? So I think that those titles, they are both very concrete and they are kind of allegorical. So they speak about, for instance, that title, one could say it's about your practice at the moment, but it's also about where you are, about the specific site. The show was at Kunstmuseum Olten, and the paintings were made in Guatemala, right?
Yes.
So I think that this focus on place or places which are related to where you live and where you work, because you work exclusively in Panajachel. That's why I think you want to go there as soon as possible.
Right.
Yes, those titles relate to the situation or coordinates of your environment over there, right? Yes. But also you introduced quite literally different persons who are around you, both your family and collaborators, workers, friends, and so on and so forth. So could you say something about some of your, the titles of your...
Well, many titles are about my dogs.
Give me one.
Others are, also I talk about with friends about a title, or it just happens to have a photo and you see something, and then you get to the title. Like with this title, I made Pancho sent me this photo that I really liked, and I sent it to several friends, and they already thought it was for the Secession. So I thought, great, this is it.
And one of the last pictures in this book, second last actually, is of this young boy on the lake.
Yes, that's my grandson. throwing a stone into the lake, yes.
Yeah, it's an amazing picture. I'm very happy that you chose it for invitation. I don't know who chose it, but...
Who chose it? I suggested it. I mean, it was an idea, and then Pancho made the photo. That's the only one.
No, it's a fantastic photograph because it's kind of like, you know, he just threw a stone into the water, but he's looking at us. So the stone is landing there, he's looking at us, and he's pointing at volcanoes, and volcanoes are kind of indifferent back there in the, you know, closing the scene. Incredibly powerful picture, and also I think it's a fantastic picture to end the book. As much as this painting here on the left is, which you can see because it's most of you cannot see it because
it has two sides.
You see something of it, but here we come exactly. It has two sides. Yeah. So we come to the idea of this show, as I understand, which is that this show is a kind of Janus face show. It is looking towards the, let's call it a garden. Yes, it is a garden, and towards the street. At the same time, some paintings are sort of, you know, showing the verso, and some of the showing the recto side. And this has become lately a topic of some exhibitions even, you know, the discovery of the reverse side of the painting and such. How interesting. But not. I'm not speaking about my curatorial friends, some of which also contributed to this catalog, so we can, you know, we are among friends, I can say that. But I think it's far more interesting to really not think about, you know, which side is more important, and to be free in the way of showing. And I'm super happy that you could do it here in this way, kind of like leading us away, but also inviting us to enter the room from either side. And here on the left, this painting is like a dog that is looking away from us as a welcome. And then I thought about this picture of the child on the shore of the lake, you know, looking at us and throwing the stone over there. There is a kind of directionality here that is very very enjoyable, I think. That kind of frees us from this very kind of rigid relationship in which normally we are in an exhibition where we are kind of fixed in our position vis-a-vis some kind of wall, and we have to kind of move along this wall and then go back. So we are like on a conveyor belt, moving from picture to picture. Here it's virtually impossible. We have to adapt much more sort of easy way of moving, and we have to find our own paths in this exhibition. So that I think is really beautiful, and especially on a sunny day like today, and hopefully also tomorrow.
And what I wanted to say, important thing is that the door will be open for the exhibition, so that Viennese air comes in here and the garden and moves the paintings. And
I was hoping that you would just open the door in order to kind of give us a nice frame for this conversation.
Yes, well, I wanted to, but they didn't let me because of the sound.
Okay. Good. I'm not sure if it's planned that we could take some questions. If not, then I don't know how we are with the time, but I think we are fairly good. If anyone would like to...
Thank you very much. We will open all our shows as of 7 o'clock. Vivian will be here. It's not that we don't welcome questions, we actually do, but perhaps not in this particular setting, because Vivian will be happy to answer questions in a more informal setting. I thank you very much for coming, and I hope you will assist us all to get the exhibition ready again for the opening. Thank you.